Hello, everyone. My name is Pam Bertani, and I'm a member of the Fairfield City Council. Welcome to our roundtable on homelessness. We have an array of talent around this table today, and we're going to talk about our challenges and solutions to the homeless problems. Thank you so much for being here. And so I want to start with a basic premise that I think we can all agree on, and that is that living on the streets of Fairfield, or any other city for that matter, in Solano County is unacceptable. I think we can all agree on that. And it may be illegal as well, right? So with that, does everybody agree? Would anybody like to chime in on that? So we can all at least start out agreeing on that one basic principle. What we're here to talk about today is what we can do individually and collectively to help folks get into stable housing and transition back into mainstream residency here in Solano County. Okay, so with that said, let me just throw this question out to anyone who'd like to tackle it. The face of homelessness is complex in Solano County. In fact, let me ask an initial question. How many homeless individuals do we have in Solano County at last count? Anybody?
Well, I can start by echoing your comment that it is in fact a complex topic, because even something as simple as how many homeless are there depends on how we define homelessness. And we don't really have a good number. There are different numbers that are used somewhat for different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly at least about 1,500, but probably closer to 3,000 individuals in the county who live on the streets or in their cars and have no home to go to at night. But if we also include those folks who have unstable housing, that number rises very rapidly. We serve, for example, at least 9,000 people in the county clinics who describe themselves as homeless. And there are estimates that that number may be as high as 12 to 15,000.
Now, what do you mean by unstable housing?
Individuals who do not have a stable bed to go to every night. So these are individuals who, for example, may be crashing on somebody else's sofa, and then they
Couch surfing.
Couch surfing is a term that's frequently used, yes. And they may move from one friend to another every month in order to have a roof over their heads, but they don't have a home. Or families who have been displaced who are staying with relatives, but really on a transient basis rather than that being their new permanent home. So if you include that larger number of individuals, the number is substantially higher. But I think that when we think of the homeless, I think many people think of those folks who we see sleeping in a tent or sleeping in a sleeping bag under a freeway. And that number is again, it's hard to be certain about, but it's probably at least in the range of several thousand.
So the face of homelessness is not one distinct definition or determined by one set of criteria. It really is a kind of a multitude of different ways of defining homelessness. So anywhere from, we can document anywhere from 1,500 to maybe 12, 13,000, depending on the definition that we use of homelessness. And this is just, by the way, we're just talking about Solano County at this roundtable. Mm-hmm. So that's just in Solano County alone. So it seems to me, just as a person living in Fairfield and going about on a daily basis, that the number of homeless folks who I encounter is increasing. And I don't know if the statistics bear that out, but I just seem to be encountering more homeless people, whether it's at in front of Liberty Church, over at Walmart, or Raley's, or in the parks, various parks around. So it looks to me as though the number of homeless folks in the county is going up. Any thoughts on why that is? Or let's back up and say, is that correct? Is that a correct assessment? Is the number of homeless people increasing?
Well, I think as we've talked, that whether it's in the city of Fairfield, whether it's in Solano County, whether it's colleagues that I talk to from around the state or around the country, you can pretty much take this topic and kind of transpose any of us into any community across America, that this is a broader societal issue. And when we try to identify homeless, I think that we have to be very, very clear that not everybody has the same issue, that whether someone is situationally homeless, that they have lost a job, they have lost their home, they're on the street, or whether it's someone who's chronically on the street, whether that's because of substance abuse, mental health issues, chronic criminal behavior. There's a whole variety of things. So that's one of the things that makes it so difficult for all of us to try to solve, because there's so many different pieces to the puzzle that
complex.
we have to get to.
Pam, I can
Samina?
certainly address as a service provider that in our shelter alone, we have the maximum capacity of serving up to 40 people a night, 24 of them being emergency beds. But over the past 1 year alone, the need for those beds has doubled, if not tripled, so that if we have 40 people a night at the shelter, we have a waiting list that it's least 3 times that long, which means that for every 40 people that we serve, there's close to 100 people who are waiting for that bed.
Wow.
Now, it never used to be that bad. I don't know what the reasons are. Cumulatively, I do hear that there have been some shelters that have been shut down in Vallejo, and so that the neighboring counties are sending their homeless to cities where there are shelters available. And there may be other reasons. There are legal reasons. There are some counties that are more strict about criminalizing homelessness compared to others. And there is talk of Fairfield being an easier city to come to if you're homeless compared to Napa, Solano County. So as we said at the outset, this is a very complex issue, and there are no direct black and white answers. There's just a lot more questions that we need to be asking.
Okay.
I think the impression you're asking about appears to be true. I mean, I think if we ask other communities, that it does appear that there are more homeless today than there were a few years ago. I don't know that there is a single answer, but it's hard for me to believe that a large driver for that hasn't been the economy. The recession has caused many, many people to lose their homes to foreclosure, many more to lose health insurance and to lose their jobs. People who were fragile are now homeless, and that doesn't mean that they go from losing their home to being on the street. They may be the couch surfers, but there are many more people, I think, really across the full spectrum of need that have been driven there by the economy. And while the economy may appear on paper to be turning around, there's always a delay in terms of the benefits of that to the individuals who are affected by it. So I'm not surprised if the numbers are up, and I would expect that they will remain up for a little while, just based on the impacts of the economy.
And I also want to add that homelessness is not an event, it's a process. You don't become homeless overnight. Whether we're talking about the chronically homeless with severe mental health issues, well, they weren't born into drug addiction. It's a process of the disintegration of family and society and work life that people go through, a process of becoming homeless to the point where they're not even welcome on a cousin's couch. And so we have to understand that there's a stereotypical image of a homeless guy as the one who's sitting under the tunnel and smoking pot, and therefore he needs to be excavated from that point. But there are levels and layers of homelessness. I have my case manager here.
Yeah, and I was
Kanitra.
going to ask your case manager, are there any repetitive themes or anything that seem to occur with more regularity in terms of case management, and explaining why folks are where they are in terms of homeless and transitioning into the Heather House and hopefully out of the Heather House?
Well, we mostly see people who have been on their job for a while, and because of the economy, they've lost their job.
It's the economy, yeah? Okay.
And they're not able to pay their rent, and then they get evicted, and then they're on the street. And so, because of pride for some people, they don't seek out shelter. They stay in their cars, or they spend their last money on hotels, or whatever it is. But I think it's the economy. It really is.
That would make sense. So with the number of homeless in our community, in our county escalating, and with the definition giving us a range of, 1,500 to 15,000, what are the community impacts of homelessness here in Solano County? Mr. City Manager, I know we have had many discussions about that. You want to lead off, and then I know Chief will have something to say about that as well.
I would like to. There are a number of different impacts that we have visibly seen that we can directly attribute to homelessness. Because people are camping in our creeks and our waterways, what we've experienced from that is increased response to fires. You might recall, all of you, earlier in about 2014, there was a larger fire that came off of Ledgewood Creek, and that spread and created the closure of Highway 12 for a period of time, and also threatened that residential neighborhood near Allenwood Park.
And our police department, I guess, were the first responders in having to, and our fire department, in having to manage that crisis. Is that right?
We were very lucky in that both the police department and fire department were very quick to respond, and because of some of the relationships that our fire department had, at the time we were able to pull in outside resources from CAL FIRE and came in and were able to aggressively fight that fire. Another fire that might burn in people's minds is the one that occurred in downtown off of Broadway Street, actually right behind the Solano County Government Center. That likely was attributable to homelessness as well. Fires are one manifestation. Certainly other community impacts are because of the camping in some of the public areas. There's certainly the concern about feces and getting into the waterways and those types of environmental impacts. There's the response of our fire department to emergency medical calls. In 2014, for at least the last 9 months, we're able to record about 450 calls that our fire department responded to. About 350 of those were responses.
It's a lot of resources.
It's a lot of resources were responses just for medical calls. And that doesn't even touch on the work that our homeless intervention team and our police department has responded to. And then there's just the impacts of businesses. So because of some of the areas where the homeless are camping, we get a lot of calls from businesses in downtown and our business parks about theft, vandalism, and also concerns about how the interactions are with some of the employees. So that's just an example of some of the impacts we've experienced, and maybe Walt would like to elaborate on some of the things the police department is seeing.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture, but we have to tell the story. And the calls to my office, the stories that our officers tell from what they see on the streets, is in fact getting more severe. And it got to the extent that earlier this year, even though that we're in an economic crisis as well in the city, and that we're fighting so many other issues, David made the clear decision, and I concur with that we had to do something different in the city. And that led to the development of not only the Quality of Life Task Force that we've developed, but also me reassigning a sergeant and a police officer with specialized training and crisis intervention work going out on the street to address the issue. And
Full-time?
we are full-time.
2 full-time officers.
A full-time sergeant and a full-time officer that are out to address this issue. And what we're finding is that it is across the board, from the situational folks that we talked about, but also the chronic individuals, the people that have been on the street for 15 and 20 years. The stories that I hear from business owners talking about the fact that they can't come to work in the morning without worry about their property being vandalized. They have to navigate feces and urine to get to their front doors. Even around City Hall employees coming to work and us having to have public works people wash down the doorways and the walkways to get into work to move from that. The damage to our creeks. And also, it's really critical to understand that there is a violence component to this, that there is a hierarchy on the street of people being victimized, women being raped, other violence that is happening associated with a chronic, hardcore group of people. So we have to deal with this complex across this spectrum that we're looking at. And so that's one of the things that we're doing in the city of Fairfield, and one of the things that we're encouraging and taking the lessons learned that we've learned to work with the county as well and work with other service providers so that we can address this in a much more both compassionate and responsible way.
I think we've done a great job at laying down at least a significant part of the foundation of the challenges that we have here in Solano County with an increasing number of homeless individuals and increasingly severe impacts in our community as a result of that increasing number. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to go to our faith community members here around the table, because I know that our pastors and churches have done a great job and have a lot of interest invested in this issue. And then we'll talk to some of our service providers. So we will be right back.
I grew up in Fairfield. I've been here since I was 3 years old.
Since I was in kindergarten.
Born and raised here.
1959.
I've been here my whole life.
Fairfield means family.
Home.
Diverse.
Great place to live.
Fairfield has a good mix of people from all walks of life.
I feel very comfortable here.
Safe, I feel happy.
It is my city.
My city.
This is my city.
My city.
Fairfield, California.
It's my city.
Welcome back, everyone. We ended our last segment speaking about the severe impacts that the increasing number of homeless individuals in Solano County is having on our community, both at the city and the county level. One of the gravest concerns came up actually during our break. And so, Bella, would you talk about the public health impacts that this increasingly complex problem has in our community?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the homeless are part of our community. And when we view community in that way, then we have a group of individuals, those who are homeless, who have higher rates of disease, higher rates of chronic diseases, shorter lifespans as a result, a lot more problems as a general rule with mental health issues and with substance abuse issues. And in many situations, because of the effects of climate and instability of housing, their lives are placed at risk, and in the cold of winter, it's not an unusual finding to have to come upon individuals who have died in the night, and so the impact on the homeless themselves is profound because of the stresses that they're under. One of the problems that can emerge with homeless, particularly in shelters, is communicable disease risks to the community as well. Fortunately, here in Solano, because we do have good reach into the homeless for our health care, we've been able to avoid that. We haven't had outbreaks of tuberculosis or some of the other kinds of disease conditions that do occur in many other communities. But for the individuals themselves, I think it's important to remember that they, as a part of the community, are impacted very directly by the problem that they're experiencing.
And that's exactly what we see on the street as well. And I think there's an emerging trend that we have to get in front of, is that we are seeing an increase again in intravenous drug use, which means that we are going to see Hep C, and we are going to see other diseases associated with this. And so it is not a crime issue. It is a beyond a societal issue. It's a public health issue. It really is.
Yeah, it is.
And this is why the team approach that we have in Solano County is imperative. Because no one entity or institution can solve this problem in a silo alone. And I know that the faith community has been particularly involved and interested and instrumental in helping to manage the homeless population. Pastor Tanya, can you give us an idea of what you believe the faith community's responsibility role is in managing this population?
Well, first and foremost, I believe that it's our responsibility to collaborate or we fail. And so trying to solve this problem, like you said, in a silo, has been a self-defeating, ongoing pattern for the church, I think, as a whole. One of the contributing factors that we found in just the past couple of years looking at charity at large, from the lens of, is what I'm doing for you helping you, or is it enabling you?
Great question.
And so, and we've classified that as toxic charity. And so,
Wow.
Trying to pull back a bit, as the faith community, and certainly a large amount of folks in our community, we want to do something great for our community, and just that that motivation alone can outweigh the end result. I need to feel terrific about doing something great for the less fortunate, and my definition of doing something great could be very skewed. And so we've had to look at the definition of betterment versus relief. And so, am I leaving you in a better position, or am I contributing to the problem? And so, we have a congregation of about 2,500 people who are very excited to do something amazing for this community. And I'm the local outreach pastor. I find myself putting the reins on folks at times, trying to pull them back, saying, "Wait a minute, we need a strategy. We need to collaborate with our entire community, and not be out there cleaning up homeless encampments and handing out more tents." And pop-up showers, and I mean, they've gone to great lengths to help people stay homeless. And we mean well, but how are we, in a large way, contributing to the problem?
So would that last example be an example of relief versus betterment?
Definitely, that would be relief. So, although I'm not discouraging, feeding the homeless and providing assistance. Relief is immediate, it's short term, and it doesn't have any sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to
Understood.
really help, then it's got to go through that litmus test of being long term and having sustainability within it and measurability.
Pastor Todd?
Well, I think where that comes from, and what I've realized is that it's going to take things like case management. It's going to take things like actively, and David, you and I had a conversation about this the other day, about working with people on an ongoing level. Like when you go into the Heather House homeless shelter, one of the other shelters, you have case management that's there working with you to help access services, as well as give some accountability. We, in the mid-2000s, started an encampment ministry in the Ledgewood Creek area, and cleaned up the whole site, took stuff to the dump, and then went back one day, and they were gone because they've been flushed out. Mm-hmm. And it made me realize how that there was no simple solution, nor was maybe necessarily doing that the best thing, because even though our intentions were well, were we really enabling them? And I found that over the years, because we have a fund in our church called the Good Samaritan Fund. We will help with rental assistance, emergency housing, PG&E, things like that. When people would come in, especially for emergency housing, like, "Hey, can you put us up for a hotel for the night?" Well, the first question I'd be, "Well, what are you going to do tomorrow night? What are you going to do the night after that? Do you have a plan?"
That's another example of relief.
Exactly, and that was always the question. And a lot of times, the people we would often help with emergency assistance would be the people who are working with places like Healthy Start, Family Resource Center, or some of the different agencies that were providing case management, because we knew that someone was working with them to get into a place of betterment, and that's what working with the Heather House, which our church.
The Heather House is a grand example of betterment.
Right, and other the other homeless service providers in town are doing that, and I think a lot of the churches support what's being done. But I think it's coming together, pooling our resources around some key things that we agree are going to actually help bring people, out of homelessness into stability. And that's going to, and I think one of the big things is helping to provide resources for case management. That's one of the biggest things.
And I know that there's, I know Sam wants to talk about what his church is doing, but I think one of the things that I hope can come out of this discussion is these concepts, is that you've got Ruth here, you've got Samina here, and that there's ways that the faith community can build bridges with these organizations to figure out how to partner their resources and help, because from the city's perspective, And I think we've talked about how operating in silos can be damaging. It just can be counterproductive. If there can be those connections made, I think we can better the whole community at the same time, bringing the generosity that's within the churches to the professionals in the field. I think can yield a lot of dividends. And so I know, Sam, I want to give you the space to talk, but I hope that's something we can also talk about as well.
Pastor Morris?
Yeah, thank you. I think from being a sower into the community for the last maybe 10 years, we've at a paradigm now where we can no longer ignore the issue. It's in our face. There was a time where we all had knew there was a homeless issue, but now it has grown out of proportion to where you can't ignore it. Just like you have to deal with situations of cleaning up feces at the regular local buildings, we do it at the church as well. But the situation, I believe, is strategically understanding that is the homeless issue is our issue, and we have to feel the same compassion and the level of concern about the welfare of our citizens, that whether they migrated here, and we know, I believe that there is news, and news does spread among the homeless community about where good service is, where you can get hotels are. You know, we've come to people and they say, hey, we heard Bay North is giving out free weeks over here at this hotel. Can you hook us up? We just got some from Liberty, or we just got some from St. Mark's. But we heard you're doing it this week. And so the news does travel, but at the same time, I do agree that we have to come together and bring our resources together so we can collectively not just keep giving fish, but teach them how to fish with the resources that we're using. And then I believe we can start to make some change as we collaborate with the city, we collaborate with the other professional organizations that are out there that are already professionally ready to assist, and we can kind of collaborate with them, and also sometimes be an extension of them when they're actually overloaded and they can no longer assist. What can we do to then corral that a resource to say, okay, let's do something different versus going out to where they are, enabling them. Let's do something constructive where we can bring everybody through a regimented source to where everyone knows that yes, Fairfield is the place you can go to, but you're going to see results. Lives are going to be changed. People are going to get jobs. We come out with statistics that say, hey, we had 3,000, but 1,500 this year are working. 1,500 now have low income housing. We have some things there. The one thing that we've done at our church is now we have a system set up where we actually help people get into apartments. We no longer want to put you in in a hotel. We want to physically find what resources that are available to help you get funding and to get you in. And we've successfully now have 6 homeless people with children that are now living in homes, paying their bills, coming
Betterment.
to worship.
Is that Betterment?
That's
Okay,
Betterment.
got it.
And so those are the type of things we're starting to look at to say, hey, let's just stop giving out money, because they're going to come back. You feed them today, they'll be back tomorrow. You put them in a hotel, they'll be back. And so we need to move toward betterment.
Bella?
I just want to offer a caution. I definitely believe that betterment trumps relief, but it doesn't count as enabling when there's no alternative for betterment. We have 40 slots in Heather House. We have cumulatively in the entire county maybe 100 beds that are permanent, and we've got 3,000 homeless. So do the math. I think that it would be really wrong to not do relief until betterment is an option. So it's not an either or, because withholding services from people who have no alternative means that they may be dead the next morning. So I just want to caution, it's not enabling, conceptually it's not enabling when there is no alternative. It's only enabling when you're preventing them from moving to betterment by providing relief. And when that happens, that's a bad move. And coordination is the only way to avoid that. But again, the numbers are profound. There are thousands who need service, and only 100, 150 who can actually get it.
And as
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And as I was hearing everyone talk, is part of the other need is more shelter bed space.
We need more homes.
Because one of the things that we're seeing is that the number of folks that want to sleep on our property is increased in the last 3 to 4 years, and it's and how to help them when we have the health problems of leaving the trash, with defecating, with
hypodermic needles.
all of that, and so it's wanting to provide that relief, but not really being in a place where we can adequately provide it. And I think that's where the more shelter beds base.
Let me ask a frank question. Should sleeping on the streets of Fairfield, be it at St. Mark's under the bushes, or under the bridge, or in Allenwood Park right across from your church, or at Lee Bell Park right across, should sleeping on the streets in the county of Solano be an option or not?
I'm not really sure that that's a relevant question because it is happening and alternatives don't exist. I think the best solution, and it's been shown throughout the country, is to provide stable housing.
The
And
reason
it doesn't have to be an apartment building. It can be an encampment that is stable.
The reason I asked the question and its relevancy is based in the fact that depending on what our response is as a community, we're either going to move to a point in our and evolve to a point in our being where sleeping on the streets is not an option. And if sleeping on the streets is not an option, then what follows is a solution, and that's why it's relevant.
Let me change that, because Bella, I think I understand what you're saying, which is, and from the city's perspective, or from city manager's perspective, is I don't think that should be the option that we're offering homeless people, is to sleep on the street. So I think the challenge then becomes in front of us is, what are the options are we going to offer? And I think then it becomes a situation of we have to talk about the solution of there needs to be more housing. We hear it from our officers on the street. They cannot find enough beds for people to be placed into. And it just can't be a bed, right? It just can't be a cot in a room. It has to be a supported environment, and there needs to be a range of options available. So I think the challenge that what I hear Pam saying is, do we want to accept sleeping on the street as a precondition? From my perspective, no, I don't want to assume that's acceptable. I want to challenge us to go beyond that and talk about what are we going to, where are we going to go, and where are we going to get the beds, and how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to get those beds.
Well, let me say with that, there is a role for a number of different strategies, and there is a role for legislation, but it is not just the answer. It is a step in certain aspects. We all know that in substance abuse issues, there has to be a motivation for somebody to change their behavior. There has to be consequences for your actions at some point to get people to change. That gets into the discussion we're having about enabling behavior as well. If we do something that helps somebody keep doing the same thing, there is no motivation for them to change.
Right.
There's also a reality that we can't enforce our way out of this issue. We can't. There are some people who would just say, just get them out of sight, just get them out of our place. And this recycling of humanity is not going to work.
Right.
But with that, we can't just go ahead and say, it's okay for you to be out there, and we'll get to you next year, we'll get to you sometime, just hang in there. We know through personalized experience that if sometimes people have to be held accountable, they have to have sometimes prison time hanging over their head to get them into treatment, to get them to make that change where they're ready to hit bottom, where they're ready to change their lives. We know that also, without going to the either or discussion, that I think a comprehensive case management system with a housing option, with some alternatives that are there,
Sure.
can be a much healthier solution. And we've seen it work in other cities. We've already seen it work in the city of Fairfield just in the short time that we've had a team out there working on this issue.
Okay, thank you. So we are at a point where we're going to take another break right now. And when we return, we are going to return on the issue of betterment and speak to some of our service providers.
Today we're going to learn more about taking care of your pets. We want our pets to stay healthy, don't we?
And strong.
And strong. And we have to feed them.
And bring them water.
And bring them lots of water. And we want to give them a warm place to sleep at night. You can get your dog a necklace and put your name and your number on it. That way if he gets out, your neighbors can call you and let you know that they...
Hey buddy, what'd you learn today? Taking care of Bubby.
We want you to do right by your pet. Contact your local shelter for more information.
And hello, everybody, and welcome back. So on the issue of betterment, we have some service providers here with us this afternoon who are going to talk about the services that their organizations render to our homeless population, to not just provide a roof, but to provide extended services to help in the transition back into stability in living. So with that, I will have Samina, why don't you start with the Heather House.
The Heather House offers emergency shelter, but with the caveat that after we've stabilized you and taken you off the street, you have to work with us in order to help you achieve independence. And like Pastor Sam said, it's not about giving them a fish, it's about teaching them to fish. So our program empowers people to deal with any mental health, medical, social, legal issues that they're having. And in addition, we case manage them to where we send them to school, we help them find a job, we get them connected to county services, we get them connected to babysitting services, with the ultimate aim that within 90 days or so, we will work with them to where they will find employment and we will transition them into a transitional rental place.
Okay, and Ruth?
Community Action North Bay believes that an end to homelessness and poverty can be. And each and every day, our tiny staff of 7 people provide trauma-informed care, because I believe, and my staff would agree, that homelessness is a form of trauma. And if you triage like you would do in an emergency room, the longer that you have been out there, we know the more vulnerable you are to the elements, to the chronic disease that develops. But we also know that housing is a right. We feel like people do not vaporize if you send them from one place to another. So we try to meet people where they are, and we do have 53 beds of housing. Not just shelter, it's housing. They get a lease, they get a 1-month lease for the transitional housing, and that's month to month. And then our permanent supportive housing is a year lease. The programs are structured such that they decide, it's their lives, what they're gonna do about their income. This is the United States, we're capitalists. You have to have some money somewhere. So we'll take them with no money, and in 3 months, we help them figure out how they want to do that. Do they want unearned income? Are they disabled? Can they get on Social Security? Or are they really just having a time and they want to get quick employment? We know that's challenging as well. So we give them the time and the space that they need and the support to make the decisions for themselves. And in all behavior modification, there's positive reinforcement, or the relief and the betterment, the hand up, the handout, and you have the negative reinforcement. So we have different techniques that we've learned in the, I guess it's over about 47 years that we've been in business, how you do that. But we try to motivationally interview people. That's an evidence-based practice that we use. So, and I don't know this except by practicing it. So I would say to the faith-based community, if you need our help, we're here. It's not a specific skill like being a brain surgeon, but it does take time and effort and energy not to get tricked into the relief betterment scenario, because that certainly is tempting, and I've fallen into it many a time. But at the same time, I can relate to the fact that when there's nowhere else to go, people don't vaporize. They may be sleeping on your streets. They do sleep in our dumpsters. So at this point, I'm just really blessed that we're having this discussion and that we're able to connect and know that we're here for each other to help those in need.
How could the county help you do what you do in a more comprehensive way?
Well, my first thing I'm going to say is I feel overwhelmed on a daily basis. I don't even know how the county functions, to be honest with you. But if I were going to say something is taking us seriously. I think a lot of times when we call, the county is so inundated that if a provider calls, we're just in the queue along with a lot of other people. And I'm not saying that they should take my call and I should get right to the top, but to have some respect and give us some street cred for what we do. And if we call about a client, there's probably a reason. I take my time to make calls. So just getting to know the providers better and responding when we're that intermediary for the church. I know I have relationships with Liberty Christian. We call a lot of times St. Vincent de Paul if we know someone really does need that motel room for the night. We don't call if we know that they have somewhere to go, or that's just, a reason for them to make an excuse.
I'd like to give a really quick illustration and a kudos to Community Action North Bay. We just recently had a case where we had a guy that had been on the streets for over 25 years, been in Fairfield for 15 years, on the streets in Fairfield for 15 years. And our officers were able to make contact with that individual, make contact with Community Action North Bay, make a connection right away with some family members that for some reason we'd never been able to get to before. We were able to get that individual not only off the streets but into a program and reunited with a family. And I think that's another piece that we have to really acknowledge, that success, as we look at success and we try to measure things, sometimes it's one person at a time, it's one case at a time. And that if we don't break down the silos and if we don't find a way to where we talk to each other in ways that we have not in the past, that we're going to miss these opportunities for success. And so thanks very much for that.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your support.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief. Samina, how could the county help the Heather House do more comprehensively your work with the homeless community?
So it's a question of the equitable distribution of resources. So for instance, Heather House has been in operation for 15 years, yet we've never had a program with county, which I'm trying to change. We're trying to establish new programs whereby under the different heads of social services, mental health services, has budgets for serving the mentally health, chronically ill, homeless. And we have the expertise, they have the resources. We're trying to match our expertise with their resources, expand our bed base, and go into contractual affiliations with mental health agencies that provide psychiatric level care to the chronically mental ill, while we case manage the residential aspect of it. So there are ways where we can channel these resources if we come together to the same table. I think this is my first experience in all my years as a service provider, that because of this roundtable, you have David sitting at the table, you have county sitting at the table, you have church providers, and you have service providers. And I think this should be the beginning and not the first, but of many opportunities where we sit and we come up with a strategic plan step by step with measurable outcomes of what is it we want to achieve in Fairfield, how can we go about it, what will it take, and what is our roles. And instead of me going back to Heather House and forgetting that we ever had this conversation, me going back and being able to pick up the phone and talk to David and talk to Bella and talk to Ruth and say, where do we go from here? Now we've opened up a question, where do we go from here to make sure that this is not relegated to a discussion, but that this is an action-packed forum?
The county is the biggest safety net source in, regionally to manage this population. The county gets, I guess, about $2 million, a little over $2 million in funding that is earmarked, that is designated for this particular component of the population. And my question, so I think it's about $2.5 million, if I'm correct, somewhere in there. Of that, does the Heather House receive any funding at all from the county?
Not for homeless. We have different grants. We work with the city and we get a portion of the CDBG monies. We get United Way monies from FEMA and federal sources. We get a small amount from First 5 Solano for children 0 to 5 who are homeless. But even if you accumulate all these monies, it translates to about $12 a night for me and Kanitra to run a shelter which provides a bed, 3 meals a day, hot and cold water, vocational counseling, rehab, services, substance abuse. What can you do in $12 a day for one person? So these resources have to be increased, and we have to be more realistic of you only get what you can buy in $12. Now, if we could expand that, we could be doing so much more.
Right. Now, does Community Action North Bay receive any funding from the county for the work that you do?
Well, we receive HUD funding through the Continuum of Care.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's directly, it has to come through the Joint Powers Authority, so that is another body or committee that meets. But we have mainly our funding coming directly to us from HUD. We have those grants coming to ourselves.
Okay.
And then we also rely on the VA. We've taken the initiative in the last 6 years, which it's been the worst economy. We've grown our budget since 2009 to about $500,000, and that's been in the worst economy. That's showing you how much need there is.
And
Because our numbers are growing, and I think it's getting better, but they just keep coming. So I guess we'll be in business for a while. But yes, we do get federal funding. We do not get CDBG money. Not that I'm maligning that. I think it was kind of divvied up before, and that's kind of how it worked. Now we need to be more strategic. There's also community service block grant money, which that's about 300 to 400. We can't get a clear figure on that, but that would be another pot that could be used, I think, in more strategic ways.
Okay.
Pam, one
Samina?
of the challenges for service providers is applying for this money. The money is out there, but there is so much bureaucratic rigmarole to go through. For instance, if you apply for a HUD grant, even their stipulation of what defines a homeless person is so complicated that a person has to have been homeless for 3 years in order to qualify for you to apply for funding to run a homeless shelter. And so there is this bureaucratic red tape that the service provider is put a ringer through, and by the time you get that grant, you've lost so much time and opportunity to actually help some people, had that trickle down effect of getting those resources when you need them and where you need them faster. And I think that's something that the city and the county can sit with the service providers and work out how to expedite getting those resources that are already there, instead of them lying in the county bank or the city bank and the service providers going around from church to others saying we don't have enough money for milk and bread today. Well, you know what, if I had to write a grant every time I bought milk and eggs, I'd be starving people at my shelter. So how can we expedite this process of getting help when it's needed?
Okay, great. Very good. So we are going to take our last break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about some concrete solutions that may help. And I used to be a teacher, so I'm going to do a pop quiz on the panel and see if we can come to some consensus on steps moving forward. So thank you, and we will be right back.
My name is Pete Padilla, and this is my city. I was born and raised here. I went to Armio High School, graduated in '77. I started boxing in '76 when the POW first came to Fairfield, and I'm basically giving back what they gave me. If I can describe Fairfield in one word, great. I've lived a lot of places, being involved with boxing, been to Europe. I came back here, so there's a reason. It's my city.
Welcome back to our last segment, everyone. So we were previously discussing the service providers who are here at the table and the services they provide, how the county could be more helpful in the rendering of your services. And Chief, our police department, quite frankly, is a tremendous service provider in this regard. And so I'd like to know, in your opinion, how could the county help our police department do more and more effectively with the resources that we have?
Well, I think one of the things that we've learned over the years is that we have to break down silos. We talked about that previously, and that there are not enough resources to go around. And it's one of the things that I'm most proud of in the police service, is that we have really worked extensively in doing that in the past number of years. Whether it's mental health issues, whether it's domestic violence issues, that collaborating with other stakeholders, or work with the schools. So I think in this regard, it's very clear what we know today in January of 2015 is much different than what we knew in January of 2014. So putting new officers on the streets, we've learned several things. That there's great value to being able to have direct relationships with the people at this table and others who are providing these services. That we have to look at unintended consequences. Bella, you made a great comment about that there's not enough help for people out there, and so the idea of providing tents and jackets are something that are a compassionate thing. One of the unintended consequences of that as well is that I've personally seen dead people in new tents and new jackets. So it is not a one-size-fits-all, and everything has issues. But if we get together and we talk about things, if we could develop, I'll give you 3 specific pieces I think can be dramatically helpful. If we had direct case management that was comprehensive and included everybody, where a police officer can talk to a service provider, that can talk to a caseworker, that can talk to somebody at mental health, that can talk to a pastor, we can make our resources go so much better. If we can develop a daycare or a day center, almost like daycare, when we're talking about a place for people when they're in the daytimes, that has them away from liquor stores and cigarette shops and foraging, or being involved in criminal activity, or just trying to survive. If we can find a way that maybe churches can agree that at different times at different places, we'll develop those resources. If we can develop a housing model, we need the help of the county to do a lot of these things. The cities don't have a mental health department. We don't have a substance abuse department. But if we're connected very closely with the people that they have, we've already seen successes. We've had people reunited from Louisiana to Washington, to Denver, Colorado, to so many different places in California. And then we've been able to get people into other programs that are starting them on the right road. The last thing I'll say is that everybody in this room knows that people who've been on the streets and been troubled, whether it's any of the issues we're talking about, aren't necessarily going to get out of it overnight. And the fact that somebody comes in and fails one program or screws up their actions and they get kicked out of a location does not mean we don't try again next week or tomorrow or another time. And we have to be in it and be sustainable and have the not only the courage but the fortitude to stay in it for the long run.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chief, very, very much for that. And so we're going to be moving toward conclusion. And as we do so, I think a great way to do it is for me to give you all a pop quiz. And here's how I'm going to set this up. So your response to my question is going to be betterment or relief or irrelevant. And from that, hopefully, we will have some talking points to move forward. But Chief, I'll tell you right now that your 3 components of a solution, I think I saw everyone's head going up and down: a day center, direct case management, and an effective housing model that offers folks options that are sustainable. So with that said, so I just want to go around and I want to get a sense of where we are with some of these milestones toward next steps, okay? So the first thing I'm going to throw out is ordinances or rules for no camping zones. Is that betterment? Is that relief? Or is it irrelevant? For instance, should the city, county have ordinances that establish certain areas, Lee Bell Park, Allenwood Park, Ledgewood Creek, etc., as no camping zones, no camps allowed, no homeless encampment allowed? Betterment, relief, irrelevant? Pastor?
I knew you were going to say me. I would consider betterment.
Betterment?
Yes.
Chief?
I think it certainly has the potential to be betterment. I'll just leave it at that right now.
Okay. Pastor?
I think that without providing another option, that it would be irrelevant. I don't feel that would really be relief or
Interesting.
betterment.
Okay.
I think
Mr.
it's-
City
'cause
Manager?
as part of a comprehensive and long-term solution, it's foundational and betterment.
I think it's temporary betterment because what you're doing is shooing those people out of one facility or area and letting them find another. So if the Lee Bell Park closes, they'll make another park somewhere else. So again, it's temporary. It's not a permanent solution.
I think it's relief. I'm a face of homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like if you're giving me an easy way out, I'm going to take it, and that relief to me means going to these different places and getting hotel vouchers and stay week after week, or living in a tent, or I think you have to have some other options. Alternative other than the relief. Because if you don't, it really doesn't, it's irrelevant.
Okay. Bella?
I assume we're answering the question from the perspective of the affected homeless and not from the perspective of others.
Correct.
And
Yes,
so
sir.
it's clearly not relief or betterment. It's definitely not irrelevant because it's pretty relevant not to be able to be there. I think that an ordinance like that makes sense when the stable housing options exist. It's definitely a wonderful final step in a string of events where you've provided for alternatives. But in and of itself, taken in isolation, it's clearly not relief or betterment, and it's clearly not irrelevant. So it makes it, sorry teacher, it's hard to answer the question.
Those are the kind of answers I like. Yeah.
It's a good discussion.
Right.
But I do believe that there is a place for something like that in a world where we've addressed the underlying issues. But by itself, it does nothing to address the underlying issue.
I agree.
So the answer is
Yes. And then I'll come back.
none of the above.
Okay.
In my humble opinion, because to reiterate what David had said, we need a continuum of care. We need a strategy that's comprehensive. They need to have betterment as well as relief as long as they are held accountable through a series of options that will modify their behavior over time, but we have to have the full inclusive array of housing, which we know does not exist. So to establish that, to say you cannot camp in certain areas, but to offer them an alternative of where they could camp would be an option until such time that we have the housing built and or the shared housing, which is a great other option. We know there's not enough housing. That is a problem that, there's supply and demand, the housing market's going up, and the rich can afford it, the lower and extremely low income cannot. So we can problem solve about other ways, but in and of itself, the final answer, D.
D.
And I have to say one more thing
Sure.
on this, because my phone is going to blow up after people see this, and my
Oh, my
email will
goodness.
blow up if I don't. That much of the focus of our conversation has certainly and appropriately been on those less fortunate, and much of our role is to help those less fortunate.
Absolutely.
At the same time, our responsibility, and I personally cannot abdicate my responsibility of being safe for 110,000 people who
No,
live
I-
in
Absolutely
Fairfield,
correct.
which
Amen.
includes people who would want to use a park without having to worry about their kids being stuck with needles, and would like to be able to let their kids go to the bathroom without someone being in there that might accost them. So there is another side of this.
That's
for
why
the
it's a tough
vast
conversation,
with the
but one needs
vast
to be
majority
had.
of this community, that if we don't do something at least in some of these areas, that we have to start with sacred ground somewhere, and that we have to start as we're going to restore this community. So, I can't say how many times people call and say, I'm tired of having to divert my kids' eyes when I drive down a portion of a city street because I don't want them to see somebody pulling their pants down in a bus stop or in a park. or on a trail, that I can't walk through some of the great trails and that are part of this great community
Yeah.
because I'm concerned about that.
Pastor Sam?
Yeah, and I definitely agree with the chief wholeheartedly. That's why I felt it was relief, not from the instance that we should have an alternative for the homeless, but at the same time, the safety of our community too, we cannot jeopardize. And since our church is across from the park, we often go over and hose things down because people still rent there, people still go and actively bring their children and dogs and everything. And then just to have the homeless know that they can just lodge there, to me, really puts everybody at risk. But at the same time, even from a biblical perspective, the Bible talks about the poor are always going to be among us. We're acting like this is brand new. This is not new. It's thousands and thousands of years old. This issue is not new. So what we are doing today is is productive to counteract and to say we have an issue, let's deal with the issue, but at the same time, let's not turn a deaf eye to a problem that's affecting the entire community at large.
Everyone. Just
because it may seem that we're, not, concerned about their situation. We are, but unfortunately, due to current events, you're in this situation. We care, but you can't do it here. I love them. If they were at my house in my front yard, I'm not, I would.
And what's your address?
I'm not going to disclose that. But just to show, if we were to take that same approach, realistically, I agree with the chief, and I really applaud him for that statement. But there comes a time where we have to have a no tolerance for certain areas being affected because it affects the entire community. But with that being said, it does not turn my desire in my heart and in the hearts of anyone at this table to want to do something else about it. So when we say that, we're not saying that we're not concerned about where they're going to go. We're just saying we should set some policies up to say, hey, these are not the areas that we want to have this problem being visible, and not to say that it's not important, but we still say that there has to be some type of accountability on his part to protect this city.
Yes.
We got to start somewhere.
Correct.
But here's the problem, and the chief likes to say this, and I love to quote him every time I get a chance. You can't arrest your way out of a problem. So the same with homelessness. Our jails are overflowing as a society, so we know that punishment in itself is not going to eradicate the need people feel to commit crime. You have to start when they're very young, and I think homelessness is the same way. You can't wish it away. You can banish it from your eye view, but it's not going to go away. So we have to get to the root of the problem and come up with solutions better than hosing it down.
Okay, great. Sure. Okay, pop quiz question number 2. A county-wide comprehensive public awareness strategy campaign, public awareness campaign, countywide, well done, well branded, to connect homeless people with existing services. Because I think at least a part of the problem is just not knowing what services are available, when, where, and how. Is that betterment? Is it relief? Or is it irrelevant? Let's start with you.
I think it's definitely needed. So it's more than relevant. It's of the moment, of the hour. I can give you Rethink Homelessness hashtag. That's the City of Orlando's campaign.
I like that.
We can do our own, but we need to have an education campaign. And I'm a former teacher too, so the idea that we need to educate not only ourselves as those who are closest to the problem in terms of being professional and addressing it, but just the general public. How do you approach someone who asks you for money outside of the restaurant where you lunched today? I told them, here's my card, come see me today.
Yeah.
Because that's the way I approach it now. So if we have a campaign that clearly says we're standing up for our community, Solano County, that an end to homelessness and poverty can be, I don't see how it couldn't.
Bella?
I think the notion of bringing people in need into the services that they require is a combination of relief and betterment, depending on what the service is. I I think it's very simplistic to think of some grand educational campaign that accomplishes that. The homeless are not reached by television ads. So, it depends on who it is that we're trying to educate and to what purpose. And
Well, I
think
didn't
it'd
say
be a mix.
television ads, I said campaign.
But a campaign implies something grand in scale, and my own folks will tell us that that's not really what's needed. They know where the homeless are. If we had the resources to provide case management assistance to them, we could reach them very efficiently, because the community is not all of it, but much of it is relatively close knit and does communicate among itself. So I believe that there are ways in which to achieve that and to achieve betterment and relief. And I think that it would bear a lot of careful consideration as to how to do that. But there are multiple goals in what you were describing, and there is also, I believe, a valid goal for helping all of us to be more understanding citizens within our community with regard to the issue of homelessness. I think that is an important element. I think it's very easy to be judgmental, and it's important not to be, because the problem is very diverse and very complex. And helping by working with each other, I think that goes without saying is the right way to do it.
Okay.
I think it's really needed. As I mentioned, I am a face of homelessness. When I was homeless, I had no idea where to go in Solano County.
Wow.
I didn't know who to call. I'm a 10-year veteran that served in Desert Storm. I did not know who to call, who to contact. None of these resources were available to me. I got on the internet, made a few phone calls, and then I found the Heather House. But as far as the resources being out there and you knowing where to go, it's not easy at all.
Thank you. And let me, before you speak, Samina, thank you for that. And it bears me saying that, believe me, when I say campaign, I mean an effective strategy to get the message out. Okay, so that's what an effective campaign does, right? Whether it's this or anything else, it's an effective strategy to get the message to its intended user. Right? So that's what I mean by campaign. Okay, Samina?
Absolutely, and not just relevant to those who are looking for services, but educating the public in the issue is crucial to us banding together as a community to solve the issue.
Which is what Bella touched on.
Absolutely, I agree. However, I always like to say, put your money where your mouth is. You can have a great campaign and you can get the message out there 100%, but do you have the capacity to then do the solution to the problem, rather than, okay, now we're all aware, here's a great number that we have developed a system, everybody knows now what to do when they're homeless, and then what if you don't have enough beds? So, follow up that campaign with concrete capacity building expansion of services.
The ability to deliver the services that we're making folks aware of. Right. David?
Yes, I think there's a need twofold. One is to help educate each other about what services are available so that there can be a good bridge made. And I think there's a need to communicate with residents and businesses in the community about where they can effectively deploy resources and how people can work with the community. I think all this fits into a larger strategy and a system that, if all the pieces are in place, will reinforce each other.
Very good, thank you. Pastor?
I agree with Ruth, excuse me, on the concept of using a model such as Rethink Homelessness, because it's a comprehensive model that not just encompasses a campaign, but it's a strategy that identifies roles and responsibilities of stakeholders in the community and gives you actionable steps to really implement in a reasonable amount of time. And I think once there is a clear model, money follows vision. And so you will see stakeholders and business owners within the community that can afford this problem rise up and write checks. But when there is no vision, people are not motivated. And so I think, the takeaway for me from this group is, if we can follow what's already working, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and the money will follow the vision on a county level, a city level, and on a private level as well. And so in that regard, I believe that it's betterment, to answer your question.
Thank you very much. Chief?
I'll go back to my earlier comment that the term homelessness is too broad and it's not accurate. Bill is a perfect illustration. You said homeless. People could have all sorts of guesses as to what that meant.
Sure.
And so I think with the people that are around this table and the issues that we've talked about, we have an opportunity to make clear and decisive action. I think every one of us has to take inventory of what we do, what our strengths have been, and what our weaknesses are. And we have to be able to come and openly look at what else can we do better, and what else can we do to, number one, come across and start talking to each other and making a plan of action. And the way that we're going to fix it here is that I think there's so many compassionate people that we've developed action plans and partnerships, then we can do just as Pastor Tanya was talking about, and we can make a significant difference. But it doesn't work if people don't get out of silos. It doesn't work if people aren't willing to identify the things that haven't worked, the things that we all could do different and we all could do better, and then move forward to a different strategy.
Thank you very much. I think I see a lot of heads shaking up and going up and down here. Pastor Sam, you have the final word on this.
Wow, well, I agree with everything you said. I do believe that a campaign will be beneficial for several reasons. Number one is, like she said, we've identified what people didn't really understand what the resources were, and then we as a church tried to collaborate and make calls and do things, but we started to find out that we really weren't networked as partners in the community, and also to begin to work against us instead of becoming a collective unit. There were times where we would even call the police to deal with a homeless situation in our church, and I'm saying this is something we should be able to handle ourselves. So we're basically now pulling resources from taxpayers to call services to go, and then now we've given them a problem. They still have to have resources connected to them to deal with, which they would say, well, we were going to call you. And so it was a vicious circle that we weren't able to really achieve a goal. But I believe, like she said, vision will invoke dollars, but at the same time, I think about the dollars that I spend personally outside the church. The panhandlers I go and they standing on every corner with we'll work for food or help I'm hungry, and the resources that they're collecting. We don't really talk about that. And then the other people who infiltrate and capitalize on it that are not homeless at all. So when you think about all of the resources that are going out the door, we just need to get information how to capitalize on people who are already doing small things like $2 a day. Some people make it in their budget. Hey, I'm gonna spend a cup of coffee worth of money on somebody homeless. But if you think about that times 100,000, your answer is already there. We're just not pulling those resources in to use it collectively to say, hey, instead of giving that cup of coffee away, we have an organization that will use that to basically start that betterment process. And I believe we can get that information out there to our residents. They will turn those small dollars into big dollars. And I believe we can start there, and we'll see some change and have some resources to do change with.
I'm getting excited. So unfortunately, we are at a point where we're out of time. So that you all did well on the pop quiz. Thank you very much. And the last question is just yes, no, or maybe. Okay, this is the last question in the pop quiz. Will you agree, everyone sitting around this table right now, will you agree to meet with me and obviously the city manager, obviously Chief Tibbet, will you agree to meet within the next 2 weeks to begin discussing an action plan based on some of the information that we've discussed here today to take the next steps in resolving this issue and achieving more betterment for our homeless community? Yes, no, maybe? Pastor?
Absolutely yes.
Absolutely yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely yes.
Thank you.
I do.
I do too.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So you're now looking at a solid group of people who all weigh in very heavily with resources and talent and experience to help us take the next steps in developing an action plan to achieve more betterment as it relates to homelessness. So thank you for your time and joining us this afternoon, and we will report back accordingly. Thank you again.